Welcome, everyone, to Driving and Dragons, the show with a somewhat ironic name, as generally I work on cars that aren't moving and talk about everything TTRPG except Dungeons and Dragons. But then wrenching and non WOTC gaming doesn't quite have the same ring, does it? The Camaro is still tied up at the suspension shop waiting for custom parts to show up, and the ignition enigma is still plaguing the Z. So we're definitely driving today, and the topic is certainly more D&D centric. So if nothing else, at least I'm not false advertising today. I do have a Facebook channel for the page now, and I'll link it below. So if you want to follow me on Facebook, the channel will actually have a page. Oddly enough, working on my cars is featured heavily in the debate that spawned this video. Let me ask you, dear viewers, a simple question. Those of you who have watched regularly have seen me adjust and partially rebuild a valve train, replace an entire engine ignition system, paint a valve cover for some added flair, replace a clutch, replace fuel pumps, delete emissions components, and make numerous other repairs and upgrades to my project cars. So, am I somehow not a real car guy because I put my Camaro in the shop and paid a guy to put the suspension components on the front end? I can do it myself. I have the knowledge and the tools. I'd just rather not risk clamps failing and a 12-pound steel spring to go flying at my head with 650 pound-feet of force pushing it when I have a shop up the road with a machine to compress and retain the spring safely. But does it mean I'm not really a part of the car restoration hobby because I paid someone to handle some portion of the things that I would rather not handle myself? How about this? Is my mechanic a vile and disgusting parasite because he charged me $1,000 to install that suspension? Is the exhaust shop ruining the car restoration hobby because they aren't going to put the finishing welds on my headers and H-pipe system for free? The answer, of course, is no. However, if you and your friends choose to pay someone to handle the task of running a tabletop role-playing game for you, you are apparently buying friends and paying someone else for the game, to play the game for you. And that dungeon master you hired is an evil cancer rotting away at the very core of the TTRPG hobby. Ooh. At least according to some in the hobby who are currently pushing one of the worst non-arguments since the outrage over using AI art. Paid dungeon masters are vile and disgusting and ruining the hobby. The people who pay them aren't actually playing the games. They are paying people so they can watch them play and are losers who pay for friends because they can't make any meaningful social connections for themselves. Both are destroying the hobby and are irredeemably evil. They are in no way a simple group of people who, for any number of perfectly reasonable and valid reasons, chose to pay for a service provided by a person with the skill and knowledge to do so, and wish to be compensated for taking the time to run a game for a group of random strangers instead of running their own group. This is a silly and stupid argument. There are 100,000 better things to get worked up about in the TTRPG space, like the glut of quote-unquote indie games that are just bad homebrew retreads of older games, making it harder for new systems and innovative updates of old ones to gain traction. Or the trend of fostering toxic player agency, which has led to a bull market for paid DMs to start with. Maybe the continued push to move tabletop role-playing games, and D&D in particular, towards a video game mentality and a model by Wizards of the Coast and other corporate virtual tabletop advocates in the space. These are the kind of things that you get worked up over. If anything, the infantile hate for the use and existence of paid game masters detracts from the legitimate discussions that could be had over the pros and cons of paid games and what ways can best serve the hobby as a whole. Crying about spending money to participate in this hobby is somehow bad, as if it isn't a reality in virtually every other hobby on the planet. It is at best a silly waste of time and energy, and at worst, an actual detriment to the hobby, as the potential benefits of paid GMs go unexplored while we fight about other people choosing to spend their money to enjoy the games the way they want to. I'm not a paid game master. I also would never personally pay a game master to run a game for me. I don't have anything against it, but being a game master is actually the part of the game that I enjoy most, so I'm certainly not going to pay somebody to do what I really like doing. I have served as a paid GM a handful of times before. I haven't in almost 20 years now, and in each instance, it was after being approached by players that I wouldn't normally play with who wanted me to run a game I wouldn't normally run at a game shop, which is a place I normally would never want to play. Literally, the only reason I would participate in that game is because someone offered to pay me. For them, the ones that paid me, they all had regular DMs who were in the group, and each had reasons that they chose to approach me with cash instead of stepping behind the screens themselves. For instance, one was a group that was having a kind of a last hurrah going away game. The majority of the group had just graduated from the University of Alabama and were going all over the country after their cap and gown ceremony. They all wanted to attempt the Tomb of Horrors. They'd heard about it before, and the shop owner was a friend of mine who gave them my number. They called and they offered to pay me to run it, so I did. There is nothing at all wrong or damaging to the hobby about that scenario, and I assure you that the money was the only reason that game happened. I would never have invited these people to my table, and I can assure you that they would not want to socialize with me either. But they wanted to all play as a group in their last session, and the quickest and easiest way to ensure that they had a good game with a competent GM was to pay a person. That person, in this case, just happened to be me. That's not the only reason either. Sure, there are low prep ways to play, but what if that group isn't interested in dungeon or hex crawling or sandboxing at all? What happens when you and your friends have only a small amount of time to devote to the hobby and you want to spend it playing a character in an immersive, narrative-driven world? Paid GM is a good solution to that. It's not the only solution, but it's still one that's pretty viable. What about a group of brand new players? They could certainly do it the old-fashioned way and have one of them learn on the fly, developing as a game master while everyone else learns to play their character. But let's not bullshit ourselves here. Most of us had our first games taught to us by friends or siblings who had them taught to them by others. A paid game master can soften the learning curve for a new group significantly. It could also serve even an established group as a way to inexpensively try a new game without having to invest in the books and other paraphernalia just to see if it fits your group. There's also something that I often cite as a benefit to using adventure modules as idea mines: familiarity. You know the people in your group. You socialize with them. You play the game with them. You know how they think, how they feel, and how their mind works in the game. A paid game master lets you have a game where nobody can read the game master without the need to bring in a temporary new player. It's great for a one-off mystery game or for running a module like the Tomb of Horrors where you don't want the GM tipping off the players. There are arguments both ways for what is good and bad about a paid GM. I'm a person who feels that an unpaid GM, a member of the group, somebody who's part of the friends group, is almost always the objectively superior option. Yet here I am laying out several situations where a paid GM is not only a viable solution, but may even be the better solution. The exceptions that prove the rule, if you will. In the end, paid game masters are people providing a service to clientele who voluntarily exchange their money for that service. That's the free market, baby. There isn't a hobby on earth that doesn't see the same kind of transactions, and the TTRPG hobby isn't some kind of special unique snowflake that is somehow destroyed by the same dynamic that exists everywhere else. Perhaps these paid DM naysayers are just salty that they can't find a DM to run some specific game they want to play for free. They could certainly enjoy the verbal masturbation of their arguments, perhaps a solo gaming experience where they play with themselves is something that they should explore, as long as no one gets paid. That's all I've got for today, folks. Like, share, subscribe, click the bell, tell a friend, send a telegram, light a smoke signal, whatever else YouTube has decided it needs to allow the word to spread these days. And I'll see you guys next time.